Good morning, everyone. Little foggy, but not so bad today. Looks as less foggy than yesterday. Looks less foggy than yesterday. I'm just going to check and make sure everything is going as it's intended. Oops, I made a mistake. And good morning. There we go. All right, come on in, everyone. We're going to talk about the news. It's the weekend. We're going to do the show a little differently on weekends. No whiteboard today. Spending time with my kids in the Friday afternoons and Saturday mornings means if I'm going to do it every weekend, got to make it easier on myself. So we're not going to stress ourselves too much and try to put too much of a narrative on it, but we're going to talk about the news and go through how it all relates to Bitcoin, because there's a lot going on this show. It's not just about what's happening in Bitcoin. It's the thing you're selling, right? We want to talk about the degradation of the thing you're getting rid of. A lot of people aren't just into Bitcoin because they're attracted to Bitcoin itself. They're into Bitcoin because the other thing is repulsive, right? So we like to talk about why it's repulsive. And the things that make it repulsive are also what makes it less likely to perpetuate into the future. And that's what this show's really all about. It's all about what helps us perpetuate into the future, what gives a clear vision of the future, how we can all imagine what's going to come next. One of the questions I had yesterday, I noticed when Trevor Noah quit his job with whatever that show is called, I had a question about the future. Where's he going to live next? He spent all this time kind of making fun of America. Now, I know when you do one of these political shows, you come out and make fun of leaders. That's fine. You make fun of maybe partisan members. I think that's also okay. I think making fun of Democrats and Republicans because of their leaders is pretty normal and run of the mill. But what he often did was made fun of just Americans. And fair game. He's not from America. He's from South Africa. But the good news for him, and this is what I want to say. So I think it's a bit of a mystery, wondering where he's going to live next. But when I look at it, he's a lot of people are congratulating him. He was the highest paid comedian in the world for a little while, or near there. And when I think of where he's going to laugh, where he's going to live, who he laughed at, and all this money that he made, I also got to say that he achieved something. He achieved something really interesting when he first moved to New York City and LA and all those places. It was they're in a golden age. They were having their best time, and in that short period, just the way his audience that he inherited from Jon Stewart went down 80%. Let's say security and attractiveness of these places sort of went down the same. And now I'd say New York City and LA are a lot more like where he came from, right? It's a lot more like South Africa, less like it was when he first arrived. So the good thing is he probably doesn't have to go anywhere. I think he can just stay in those cities and feel totally at home because they're, it's pretty much what he's used to. He got it right to where it was. So all of his criticism of America was kind of successful because he created a place for himself in America that's a lot like where he's from. So that's pretty good. Good for him. So we mentioned yesterday on the show Greg Gutfeld, and it looks like he's sort of put them all out of business. The guy, all of these late night shows are out of business. I get it. It's the same joke. They all have the exact same joke. Oh, did you see what that guy said? He's a politician. It's the same joke every single time. I knew when Steve Colbert came out, it was not funny, right? I didn't like Jon Stewart even, and then the copy Steve Colbert, it was the same joke. You just had to watch the same joke over and over again. Some people liked it, but I do have we talk about predictions and where he's going to live. That's one. I have another, and this is a Bitcoin related one. I think that everyone's talking about how much money he made and what a success he was as a comedian. I haven't seen one highlight reel of jokes, not one. Like there hasn't been a single highlight reel of jokes. Jon Stewart had a highlight reel when he quit. There was joke after joke after joke, and I think everyone thought he was funny left and right. And he was a pretty funny guy. Trevor Noah, there's no such joke there. Everyone's sort of no such reel there. Everyone's sort of arguing, was he funny, or was it just that he made a bunch of money? And mostly people just talking about the money he made. So my prediction is this: he may become the poster child for fiat comedy. I think comedy is a big part of what we're doing in Bitcoin. I think we're going to be laughing at ESG. This stuff's hilarious. You have to laugh at a lot of these politicians. You have to laugh at Veep President Kamala Harris and Veep style Joe Biden. It's pretty funny. I mean, people are suffering. There's all kinds of misery going on in the world. But even watching these people with the Baltic Sea thing, trying to run the same playbook they ran with the Russia hoax, Russia collusion hoax, watching them run the same playbook, you put out John Brennan, you put out the known liars that signed the 50-person document saying that the Hunter Biden laptop was Russian disinformation. They're all saying the Russian disinformation again this time on the pipeline thing. So in a lot of ways, he can become sort of the poster child for fiat failure in comedy. If everyone's just going to brag about how he made the most money, sure, give it to him. I think he's a super rich and successful comedian in that way. And as long as that's your metric, he's awesome. Now, on our end, in Bitcoin and the Bitcoin world, we put a lot of attention on comedians as it is, because it seems like probably the only way we can get some of these ideas to perpetuate and go forward. That's why at the Bitcoin show in Miami, there's always a comedian stage, and there's a long history now of the event getting big name comedians. Tim Dillon, we had him a couple years ago. He did a hilarious trailer to a fake movie about where are the keys and all that stuff. I think it's going to keep going. And I know, as someone who's trying to help with the stage at Bitcoin 2023 in Miami, we want Dave Chappelle. We want the best comedians. And because that art form is probably the only useful thing we've got to really, I guess, package all of these complicated ideas that are happening at once. And the only way to bring about that change that we need is laughter. So I think we're going to have a heck of a laugh at ESG and the politicians, and there's a whole laugh track waiting for us. And it's not going to have to be like that fiat, now it's time to laugh at Jon Stewart's joke or at Trevor Noah's joke, right? We're not even going to need a laugh track, because the punchlines are going to be hilarious. The punchlines are going to be, look at how poor you are, and look at your dumb mistakes, and look at all this crazy time you waste on silly subjects. Even look at the pipeline. Everyone wondering, what is it? Who did it? We didn't get confirmation. you don't need confirmation. You're not, you don't, the denials and everything are enough. And anyway, if you want to really understand what happened there, I think most Bitcoiners would tell you that Greta did it, right? Greta did the pipeline. There's even a picture going around the internet, which I think is hilarious. Right? If you can catch that, it's Greta and the pipeline. So there's Greta. So we caught her. We caught her red-handed. But seriously, this is the problem with protecting someone for so long from criticism. They promoted her as an innocent child, but she is an adult now, right? She's an adult now. And that idea that you can protect her all the time because somehow she's ingrained with a virtue is a big problem. And now we look at the amount of information that was sort of dumped in her wake, right? The information that was dumped in her wake all of this time. And we look at energy policies. How could anyone deny that everything she argued for hasn't put Europe in this position where it's getting America dictating where its energy is coming from and Russia also trying to dictate where Europe's energy is coming from? And if you ask me, this is 100% Greta's fault. They followed her and they got what she asked for. So I say, you know, I don't think Greta did a rocket. She doesn't have rockets or anything. And I'm pretty sure she's mad about the methane bubbling up into the atmosphere. I'm told it's the largest methane leak in the history of the world or something crazy like that. I mean, it's a substantial amount of methane headed up into the air. So I don't think Greta had that in mind when she started on her quest. So hopefully Greta can pivot a bit and try and help in new ways, because she might be useful in the end. Who knows? But right now she's got some explaining to do. Will they let her explain? Probably not. So who cares? Next story that we are following here is Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill, has teamed up with Zelensky in Ukraine to fundraise a drone army. Now, we talk about drone armies a lot on the show. We love drone armies. We think that drone armies are absolutely the future and are going to be one of the main factors that helps limit and throttle the ability of nationalized standing army force to be the major balancing force in the world. So it used to be all these countries would fight in a world war. A lot of people, the sovereign individual authors, a lot of people predict a sort of warlord era because the cost of the weapons now with drone technology are greatly reduced, and their capacity to inflict damage on much more expensive weapons is a reality. So if you're going to fight a cheaper war with far less loss of human life, because these are just video game people, they don't have to be anywhere. And those, even when you look at the quasi drone army technology, like the javelins, where you're using GPS and remote calibrated machines. It's two people that can run one of the javelins, right? There's the person who holds the actual rocket, and there's the person who gets like the iPad. It's not an iPad, but whatever, the pad with the screen that has the GPS locations on it. And they can blow stuff up miles and miles and miles away. They're off having lunch by the time the rocket has destroyed whatever its target is. So how can a tank compete with this? And when we look at a tank, we've always understood that the weak part of a tank is the top. Right? It's the fleshy, if it was a dragon, it would be the fleshy underbelly. And so these things get hit, and if you know how these javelin rockets are being calibrated, they break the first bit of armor and then they explode, right? So they explode inside, and devastating. When you see some of the images of the aftermath of that, it's I won't describe it because it's Saturday morning, but it's pretty gruesome, you can imagine. So not fun. So Luke Skywalker teaming up on a drone army, you're going to see more of that, and I think it's going to be really successful. So Mark Hamill is probably winning here. Probably winning. I'm not sure if everyone likes it, but he's winning. The next story we're covering is a bit of generational stuff, and I want to bring it up because we saw a quote yesterday. Someone released a conversation between the CEO of Twitter, Parag, and Elon Musk that happened a few months ago. And it brought up this whole generational dialogue in America. And when we look at how Bitcoin fits into this generational dialogue, it becomes real interesting. So I'll get to the quote in a second, but I'll even mention first, because it did bring up this whole conversation. So someone pointed out that, Gen X should be in charge of the US by now. So Gen X would be people at this point who are sort of 40 and above, 40 to 60. So those people technically are in their leadership prime, and they're nowhere to be seen. I think Business Insider had a story on it yesterday. They had like milk cartons, where are the Gen X leaders? And they mentioned that boomers still hold prime positions of power, including the presidency. Gen X has yet to secure a majority of seats in Congress. And of course, they will not get the Supreme Court for quite a while. So points out that there are these, generational problems. Now, Bitcoin fits into this in really interesting ways, because we've seen boomers who are Bitcoiners, not as many as we'd like, but one of the best, Stanley Druckenmiller, who we're going to talk about in a second, had a lot to say yesterday about the economy and all that. And this guy's a real Bitcoiner. So that's a part of it. The Gen X piece, we see Elon Musk, who is a quintessential Gen Xer, getting into this fight with a millennial, and that's Parag. And here's the quote. It was Parag, in an email or text exchange or whatever with Elon Musk, says, and this is when Elon was causing, I guess, a lot of trouble, making announcements in the initial part of the takeover. So Parag says, "You are free to tweet, is Twitter dying, or anything else about Twitter. But it's my responsibility to tell you that it's not helping to make Twitter better in the current context. Next time we speak, I'd like you to provide perspective on the level of internal distraction right now and how it is hurting our ability to do work." So Parag is asking Elon Musk to explain to him and reflect on his, his shenanigans. "I hope the AMA will help people get to know you, to understand why you believe in Twitter, and to trust you. And I'd like the company to get to be in the place where we are more resilient and don't get distracted. But we aren't there right now." So Elon Musk's only reply was, "What did you do this week?" So to all that. So here was what Mike Cernovich had to say. This is two Americans. The first is the fake therapeutic one. Hours and hours spent massaging egos. Yes, white males are like this too, not just wokesters. True. And serving as a vibe manager. The second is the fading get work done mindset. Fascinating exchange. So here Cerno is saying that millennials, implying, have a fading work ethic. I think in general, true, especially the millennials that are all in on corporate, jobs and all this. Sprague would be, I think, a great example of that. So he's pointing out that there's this distinction. And, I've always noticed that Gen Xers are, there's nothing they don't want to trade, right? They grew up in a trading environment. It was clear in early Bitcoin that the Gen Xers were just super interested and were around a lot. I'm on the border of the Gen X and millennial piece, right? Because just there's some people, if you're from the early 80s, you're in the middle, right? You're in the middle. I went to elementary school and had a Macintosh. From kindergarten on, I had a Macintosh, and we grew up. We're sort of in the middle, right? Sort of in the middle. I went to college until 2008, and had Facebook in college. I went to law school, so there's the two college periods in my life. Anyway, so on the border, so I can see both, right? I can see both. I lived a whole millennial life of, a whole Gen X life of lots of travel in those early days, lots of nomadic stuff. But certainly with college and with the Bitcoin work part, it's been mostly with millennials, right? We've been working with our audience and the traders and the sponsors and the people that have dealt with the media products. So, I worked for early CoinDesk. So I was there from when Barry Silver bought CoinDesk and brought it to America. And I worked at New York City with that team for quite a while. And still do work with them. But also with Bitcoin Magazine, doing this kind of stuff. and the Bitcoin Magazine show. So all that to say is I still have a lot of visibility into sponsors and who's paying the bills of these media companies, and how we get the job done to provide news to you, what we actually do to stay profitable. It's the event all the time, right? The event is what allows the free news to go out and all that stuff, and to pay for journalists. And so it's a good business model. But, in a lot of ways, it is Gen Xers who have been paying a lot of the bills. So they're all there. But what I want to say is, because they're all there in Bitcoin and they're not being divided into these, Bitcoin is sort of a filter on millennials in particular. So a guy like Parag, who's worried about your vibe and this and that, and, how the corporate thing is doing, that can exist in Bitcoin, but it's definitely not predominant, right? Bitcoiners, and I've worked in a lot of teams and seen a lot around Bitcoin in the years, just even being in the event production piece, you just get insight, right? Marketers. I've been saying for a long time that exchanges, and I worked in an exchange as well. And when I worked at the exchange, I heavily promoted the idea of corporate intelligence basically going into event production in order to hear what communications people from competitive teams have to say, because the communication guys will actually spill the whole beans on the company because they're dealing with the egos of the CEOs. I mean, really, their job is to help CEOs, fulfill their mandate. So weirdly, the corporate communication guys, especially in events, will just tell you everything that's being said, everything on their mind, whether you ask them or not. It's just that they have the anxieties of the company and perception of the company. At the tip of their tongue. So it's actually a great place for corporate espionage if you're interested in that kind of thing. But that's not what I do, obviously. Just a suggestion to exchanges who are interested. So Bitcoiners actually have a really good grasp of each of these generations, I would argue, right? I've seen plenty of boomers, plenty of millennials, plenty of Gen Xers. And I wouldn't say that's the same mix in the fiat world, right? You've got millennials, but those ones are folks who aren't really picturing much of a future that's different than what they know today, right? They're sort of trying to perpetuate what's going on. You'd find a lot of boomers in that camp as well, because they're old, they're not going to adjust today, they don't want things to change so much. They've had the best ride of any generation in the history of planet Earth, right? There's no doubt about that. So they don't necessarily want to change. But the ones that we've attracted, like in the case of the Gen X's, Elon Musk, and in the millennials, we've got Jack, and we've got all these guys that are doing great. So from that point of view, I think Bitcoin has the generational piece taken care of. And to a certain extent, it won't even be your choice, right? Some of this stuff ends up overriding you. And we like to talk about that. Like, Austrian economics doesn't divide things into microeconomics and macroeconomics, I think rightly, because individual choices are almost the most important part of this. And these choices aren't always logical and rational. They're sometimes just influenced by the wider conditions in the world. And what we're seeing today are those wider conditions. So let's go to, I think, one of the best Bitcoin boomers there are, Druckenmiller, Stanley Druckenmiller. Stanley Druckenmiller had a talk yesterday or maybe 2 days ago at Seeking Alpha, CNBC event. He was on stage with Joe Kernan, who interviewed me many, many times in early Bitcoin. And he hated Bitcoin back then. He was unbelievably rude all the time. He used to, when I would go on stage, it was very adversarial in the set back then. Bitcoin and mainstream media. This would be 2017, 2018. Very adversarial. They didn't want Bitcoiners to be successful. So what Joe used to do, believe it or not, I would get onto the set, and on CNBC, I'd be right in Times Square in the morning, and the cars would be going in the back. He wouldn't look at me. He would read his newspaper like this, right? He would read his newspaper to not look at me and say, whatever you're talking about is not interesting. So even when I'd be on camera, he wouldn't wait for my answer. He would ask and then just put the newspaper up in his face, really to distract you, right? They want you to screw up, and then they can get a hit or whatever. So, but luckily I never screwed up and was pretty well prepared for it all. We forgot to do the whole sip and morning. Pardon me, guys. I'm trying to make a habit of it. Sun is up, as you saw. I checked. Bitcoin is running, and I got a nice hot coffee. I'm going to try to remember to do that each time at the beginning of the show. So, Drunken Miller had gone on, so he's getting interviewed by Joe Kernan, who became a Bitcoiner, so we love him now, right? We forgive him for all that stuff. Who cares about the newspaper? I'm not a victim. So Joe Kernan interviews Stanley Drunken Miller on stage at Seeking Alpha and reminds him of some predictions he'd made after the global financial crisis. So he went on a college tour to try to explain to kids, university students, what was going on and how they should prepare. So now he brings him back and asks him, about all this stuff. So some amazing quotes from this exchange. So first of all, he compares his own experience. He was involved with, in the Soros breaking of the Bank of England, right? So he was involved in that. Not in a coordinated way, not like I'm working with Soros. A lot of people saw Soros put up the $10 billion short against the Bank of England and jumped in because it was an opportunity. And he calculated it at the time. He says, if it didn't go my way, I would have lost, it was a risk reward thing. He goes, I would have lost one, let's call it $1, right? But the reward for breaking the Bank of England was $40, right? So it was a 40 to 1 risk reward balance. And he argues that the risk reward bet that the Fed made back then equals the same 40 to 1 odds when they raised interest rates at the time, 30 basis points from 1.7 to 2% interest rates back then. He said, and it failed, right? Because the bottom has fallen out of that. Obviously, it was unsustainable at the time. And even though it picked up for a few years and stayed sort of even, they've lost and now it's broken down. And he says the risk reward is about the same. It was a 40 to 1, but they lost, right? Not him. He didn't bet on that. He was saying the Federal Reserve didn't do a risk reward, appropriate risk reward analysis when they did the intervention 10 years ago, and said, now we're dealing with it. So at the time, he was talking about entitlements being one of the main features. So that's Social Security, healthcare, all the entitlements in the American system would be a major resistance factor to, or an obstacle for the Federal Reserve to be able to, basically help the federal government reach its entitlement liabilities. And now he's redone the calculations. So back then he said it was really bad, right? Now he's redone the calculations because he did everything at 0% interest rates, thinking the interest rates would keep coming down because of the intervention. And now they're going to go up. So what he says in his calculation, if we get 4% rates by 2027, the cost on the interest alone of U.S. national debt will equal all entitlements for healthcare, right? So basically, they can't afford, or at least will be paying as much for interest as they would on healthcare. Maybe not so bad. What he says by 2047 is that all discretionary spending is gone. There's no more. Everything is to service the debt. So it eats up the entire surplus. So the best part of the exchanges, Joe and him are talking about it, and they're talking about it in the context of Britain and what's going on with the Bank of England and all this stuff. And Joe is, quite surprised at what Stanley's saying. And then Stanley says, I brought some cyanide if you want. I brought some cyanide, right? This is a great boomer. We love this guy. We love him, right? I brought some cyanide. So we got that going on. Now, a little bit more on that, divide between boomers and millennials. And this one comes from Cerno. And again, I think Bitcoiners and the whole Bitcoin economy is really tuned to this. I think this is news to a lot of boomers, and hear what Cerno has to say. So he's continuing to discuss in this context, and he says, boomers don't understand that young men must be exceptional, all caps in exceptional. So boomers don't understand that young men must be exceptional even to live an ordinary life. The world changed. Just say hi and be yourself. Oh my God, that advice is child abuse. Don't even comment. Go back to whatever time capsule you're stuck in. Life today, you gotta be on point. And he goes on to say that the flip side is, if you're the top 10%, you're living life better than a Roman emperor if you're a millennial. And what I'll say is that Bitcoiners have sort of understood this almost from the beginning, that if you're going to be able to have a high quality of life, you literally can't compete against the banksters and the policymakers. That you have to do it yourself. And that's not do your own research or anything like that, but that's just actually do the fundamentals of financial literacy, save money, invest some money, and have cash flow. Complicated stuff, right? It's not what the boomers were used to. Get a job, get a house, and all that stuff, right? That's I think what he's saying. Now, Bitcoiners have understood that because our entire argument is it's hard to have a normal life now, right? That's the whole argument, right? If it was easy to have a normal life, Bitcoin wouldn't be happening, right? People would just be doing the other thing, right? The point is the entropy in the previous system got so bad that it became useless for what it ought to do, right? Now, I appreciate a great deal that in the fiat standard, Seyfedian did have a lot of respect for what fiat was at the time it was invented, because it was a great invention. Let's not deny fiat currencies were an amazing invention and have brought some of the most amazing outcomes for the world that we've ever seen. But like anything, the energy and the capacity can be spent, and that's what we're dealing with. And it's a hard thing to admit, especially when it has been so successful. You don't want to give up on a a high yield, lot of outcomes, a lot of positive outcomes situation, right? You want to maintain those, but it isn't always your choice, and that's kind of what we're dealing with here. And so we have to commend Drunkenmiller, and in some ways, Cernovich, right? Cernovich is really helping folks who aren't in Bitcoin understand that a little better, because a lot of millennials that don't know about Bitcoin are trapped in a guilt-ridden productivity enhancement optimization trap, right? They can't stop. They have huge mortgages and trying to stay close to a downtown core of an expensive city and all the things we all know about already in Bitcoin, right? So big problems. But it's going to become more and more obvious. And the next story, the last story of the day that we're going to cover, I think, really reiterates that. So this comes from Europe again. So did you know that France and Germany? I just got to see one thing here. I have not had my comments on from YouTube, so I might have to get a couple of comments going here. 1 second. Nope. Okay. Well, no biggie. All right, team, if you're on the YouTube chat, I desperately would like to see your comments, but can't get to it right now. That's okay. No biggie. No biggie. I'll get you next time, guys. Okay. All right. Okay. So, this is the last story. This is the mega politics stuff again, right? Things that are beyond our, things that are beyond actual choices in the end, that just come to you and push people over the edge. So, in France, the Minister for the Economy has demanded access to every single banking transaction of every citizen, right? So every citizen. So when I got into Bitcoin when I was working for the Senate Banking Committee in Canada, and our FATF, FinTrack, FinCEN in the United States, FinTrack in Canada, came to us and said, we want all transaction reporting from zero upwards, just like Australia. And we have the $10,000 threshold like in the United States and Canada. So I started investigating what this FinTrack thing was and what FATF was, and found some really disturbing results. They were not prosecuting anyone. They were not catching anyone doing anything, yet it was costing everyone a ton of money. And in the political situation in Canada, the states can issue charters, bank charters. The federal government can issue charters to federal banks. And what ended up happening is the state charters aren't allowed to corporatize compliance for FATF and money laundering and terrorism financing stuff, reporting, right? The compliance reporting. They have to do it at each branch, at each franchise because of the corporate model, right? That's the distinction, in fact, of what allows a state bank in Canada and a federal bank. It's the corporate model. And in our government, when I was working for that administration, we said, well, this sort of prejudices states, and that was sort of our bread and butter, right? We were more of a states' rights party, and so we said that's they're telling little farming co-ops that they have to do compliance before lending to a farmer. It was really good political hay. And I learned about Bitcoin. So this was 2012, and I learned about Bitcoin, and I got a Bitcoin study going in 2013 in the Senate, and have been in Bitcoin ever since. So, I became a very knowledgeable expert about FATF and all of its failures. I mean, real failures. And I turned a bipartisan political committee, liberals, Democrats, Republicans in Canada, we say liberals and conservatives, both of them, I had them hating FATF. I mean, angry at what they were doing. So it's out there, right? This is a real opportunity for us, and I'll explain how I see the opportunity. So you got France saying that at the same time, and now France and Germany are doing like a World War II thing now. They're virtue signaling and competing, but no one's dying, but they're trying to be like the most virtuous. They have it going on for the temperatures in their buildings right now. So because of the energy thing, the German public buildings all have the thermostats stuck at 66 Fahrenheit, 19 Celsius. And in France, they went with 64 Fahrenheit, 16 Celsius. So they're like competing on who's more virtuous when it comes to keeping the temperatures down and who uses less energy. It's beautiful, right? So we got the France guy saying we're going to look at all transactions. Meanwhile, in Germany, it turns out that FATF is now naming and shaming Germany. They're saying Germany is this big money laundering hub. It's happening everywhere, and they need more power now. They need more control to tackle financial crime. Now, this exact playbook, is why Hong Kong is now just a shitty Chinese village, town, whatever it is, right? Just a few years ago, Hong Kong was a great symbol of British common law, of the international capitalist system, all kinds of good things. Right? All kinds of good things were happening in Hong Kong. It was a wild west of money. It used to be called a real Hong Kong dollar, which meant there was no tax. Now, when they said a real Hong Kong dollar, the Hong Kong dollar is just a US stable coin, right? It's a 7x US stable coin. And so it's pegged to the US dollar. So it is the US, it's a new US dollar. It's a type of US dollar. And so it's very attractive to people. And because there was no tax on it, it was as the financiers that lived in Hong Kong that I met in that era would always call them, a Hong Kong dollar had a pride to it because there was no tax on it, basically, right? There was a pride to the Hong Kong dollars because when you earned a Hong Kong dollar, you earned a Hong Kong dollar, not, 50 cents on the dollar or something like that. So here's what happened to Hong Kong, a capitalist dream, right? A real Wild West place, and a place that incubated early Bitcoin in many ways because of all the crazy stuff that was going on there, and all the Bitcoiners that went there, and all the activity that was going on there. And that's why I used to go there, to go meet, crazy early Bitcoiners. So all this stuff is going on in Hong Kong. What ended up happening with Hong Kong was in 2019, China took over FATF. FATF is a rotating national presidency, so it's China's turn in charge of FATF. The first thing they did was name and shame Hong Kong as a money laundering hub, right? They named and shamed Hong Kong as a money laundering hub. And Carrie Lam, the CEO of Hong Kong, which I love, right? I love the no mayor CEO, right? It's such a good system. We should adopt it all around the world. That's what made Hong Kong great, those kinds of things. So the CEO of Hong Kong says, right, no, look what FATF said. We need to extradite people to mainland China. Here's the thing, that Hong Kong Island was British soil with common law was the whole point, right? That's what actually destroyed the old Chinese emperors, because they had been trying to have revolutions for years, because this was one of the most rotten, decrepit empires in the history of the world that treated its citizens poorly. It was really awful, the Manchurian system that they had. And now the original dissidents actually had a place where they couldn't be extradited to. It was huge, right? So the actual revolution that changed China, even the communist revolution, right? Even the communist revolution that they enjoy today, has its source, has its origins in Hong Kong and the inability to extradite people to mainland China, right? China laughed at Britain when they asked for that island. They said, you can't farm it, there's no water. What was not understood was it's the greatest natural port other than New York City, in the world, right? In the world. It's the greatest natural port in the world. The amount of ships you can build there, the amount of ships you can dock there, what's going on, right? And because it's a hill, it's very easy to defend. No one can take it, and just put a cannon on top and shoot. The Japanese did take it in World War II, but it's very difficult. So we gave up Hong Kong for FATF compliance, is what it comes down to. We gave up Hong Kong for FATF compliance. What I see happening in Germany and France today are exactly that. Right. And we never even asked the question, are we giving up Hong Kong for FATF compliance? We didn't ask the cost. We just said FATF compliance. Oh, great. Hong Kong has to have extradition. Are we going to ask the question when we give up France and Germany? Now, the good news is it's going to be so darn cold there that I think a lot of people are going to leave this winter and get rid of euros and not go back because it's going to be spy tech coming up. So that's the good news about Europe. Right? There's a way out, right? As long as we know that they're literally trading any semblance of being a democracy or a free country or having free people when they do this financial surveillance piece. It's happening in both Germany and France. So I think the euro is going to seem even less cool and interesting shortly, which is great. Right? We don't want the euro to be a good competitor. It's just boring money, right? We like boring money. We have fun money. So the boring money is good. All right. I'm going to try and find the quotes or any comments on YouTube, and then I will be calling it a day. I got, weekend business. All right. Let's see what's up. Well, I don't think I'm going to be able to see them, guys. Let me see. Maybe I will. Oh, no, I won't. Ooh, there we go. Hey, Dave. Hey, Huru. What's up, man? Okay, I got to the comments. Oops. Okay. All right. My guess is this is from Dave0126. My guess is the Fed raising rates to decrease stock, bond, real estate prices, so boomers will have to remain in the workforce because we can't afford for all of them to retire with benefits. Yeah, I wouldn't. I continue to not be. I've met enough central bankers to know that they're mostly faking it all the time and don't really see that far into the future and don't really understand consequences the way they put on. That doesn't, and I think because they can't face it because of the consequences and responsibility. I don't know. I don't want to mind read them. I don't know the answer. Mostly they're not awful people, but I think in the end they're making choices like you're mentioning. Yeah, like we have no choice. We don't want people to die. So in the end, let's just not let them retire and work further. So they're definitely making, incredible choices for people, but that's the good news, right? That is the good news. The more of these huge choices they think they can make for people, the more they likely will just get ignored. And look at Europe this winter. Again, no one's talking about this, but it's that cold. They're trying to do this much stuff with the euro. What's stopping young Europeans from just going to Kenya or Thailand or anywhere in the Caribbean for the winter? You're now involved in other money. All of a sudden, de facto, you are. Why would they go back to that necessarily? Right? Like, I love going to eat and drink in Europe, but that's all it's good for. Like, I just go and eat and drink. There's nothing else going on there. Like hiking, fun. I mean, they live a great life, but you don't go for work or jobs or build a life or anything like that. So hopefully that's the way it goes. All right, team. We're done. See you tomorrow.